So it's been probably 1 billion views of your Tucker Carlson interview, lots of positive response, but of course we understand what kind of comments we've been getting from Western leaders. The Prime Minister of Great Britain and Chancellor of Germany called this, I quote, an absurd, ridiculous attempt of justifying the reasons for the beginning of a special military operation by the threat of NATO attacking Russia. Well, first of all, it's a good thing that they are watching and listening to what I say. If today, for some reasons that have to do with them, we cannot have a direct dialogue, then we should be grateful to Mr. Carlson for being able to do this via him as a middleman. So the fact that they watch and listen is good. But the fact that they twist what I say, that's bad, and they spin facts. Why? Because I didn't say anything like that. I didn't say that the beginning of our special military operation in Ukraine was triggered by the threat of NATO attacking Russia. Where is it in my interview? There's a record. Let them show exactly where I said that. I was saying something different. I said that we had been constantly deceived from the point of view of non-expansion of NATO to the east. By the way, the then Secretary General of NATO said that, a representative of the Federal Republic of Germany, he said not an inch to the west, to the east. And then there were 5 rounds of expansion. Of course, we are worried by the possibility of Ukraine being pulled into NATO, because this is a threat to our security, and I said that. But the real trigger was complete denial of today's Kiev regime to observe the Minsk agreements and ongoing attacks with numerous human casualties against the republics of Donbass, the Lugansk People's Republic and Donetsk People's Republic, which we had not recognized for 8 years, and who ultimately turned to us, asked us to recognize them. We recognized them, then we signed this treaty, friendship and mutual help, and in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations Organization, we fulfilled our obligations under this treaty. As I said, we didn't start the war, we're only trying to stop it. Initially, we tried to do this with peaceful instruments, through Minsk agreements. As later turned out, we had been deceived in that as well, because the former German Chancellor and the former President of France publicly declared that they were not going to fulfill those agreements and were just winning time to pump more weapons into the Ukrainian regime, which they did. The only thing we can regret is that we hadn't taken active action before, believing that we were dealing with decent people. Carlson had been criticized before the interview, and after the interview he's now blamed for, well, softballing you. They say he was too soft with you and you had it very comfortable during the interview. Do you think you kind of overwhelmed the American journalists? Well, I think your Carlson, when I say your, I mean is a representative of your journalist community, he's a dangerous person, and here's why. Because I, frankly speaking, thought he would be aggressive and would be asking tricky questions. I wasn't just ready for that. I wanted that because that would have given me an opportunity to provide, well, tricky answers, because and that would have provided a certain atmosphere to our entire conversation. He has chosen a different tactic, however. He did try to interrupt me several times, but still, surprisingly for Western journalists, he was patient, patiently listening to my long dialogues, especially those on history, and he didn't, well, give me an opening, didn't give me an opportunity to do what I was prepared to do. So frankly speaking, I didn't absolutely enjoy this interview. He followed his plan strictly, and he fulfilled his plan, I think. And as for, well, it's not up to me to judge how interesting it was. That's up to viewers, readers of the materials to decide. So right after the interview, there were calls on sanctions to be introduced against Tucker Carlson, and rumors are that he could even get arrested. Is that possible? Well, Assange is in jail. Nobody remembers him anymore, except maybe his family. That's it. That's the way, well, public conscience works, I think. Topics just fade out, that's it. Well, at least Assange was charged with disclosing some state secrets. Can't blame Carlson for that, because he didn't touch upon any secrets at all. But still, theoretically, everything is possible in today's United States. So from the point of view of Carlson himself, that would be very sad. I don't envy him, but that was his choice. He knew what he was doing. But from the point of view of letting people across the world know what is the so-called liberal democratic dictatorship that's so brightly represented in today's US elites, that would have been good. They would have shown their true colors in that case. So Carlson said that after the interview, so I had this question, Carlson said that after the interview you had a conversation off camera, and everybody wants to know why. Well, he was following his plan, as I said, as I understood, and he didn't go beyond that plan. There were some other topics that I think were worth mentioning, but I didn't want to, well, I didn't want to add any extra topics that he wouldn't raise in our conversation. So the matter of demonizing Russia, related with inter-ethnic events, with Jewish pogroms in the Russian Empire, of course, I think they should have been raised in the official part of the conversation. But one of the topics we spoke on off-camera was what Mr. Blinken, the State Secretary, had said, that his relatives, his granddad, I think, had fled Russia from Jewish pogroms. And this topic constantly pops up in different countries across the world, in Europe and the United States. It pops up with the goal of demonizing Russia and showing the barbarians and scoundrels live here. While, in fact, if we take a look at what the State Secretary said, and if we look not at political slogans, but at the essence of the problems that were taking place, a lot becomes very clear. It's all in our archives. Mr. Blinken's great-grandfather indeed fled from the Russian Empire. He was born somewhere in Poltava region and then lived in Kiev and fled from Kiev. So the question is bound to arise. Does Mr. Blinken think that this is historically Russian territory, Kiev and adjacent territories? That's one thing. Thing number two, if he says that his great-grandfather fled Jewish pogroms in Russia, and at least, I'd like to emphasize, he thinks that back in 1904, which is when his great-grandfather left Kiev, for the United States. So back in 1904, there was no Ukraine there. He says that his great-grandfather fled from Russia. I guess Mr. Blinken is one of ours then. But probably he shouldn't be doing such public statements. That could lead to a failure. Just the other day, German mass media released articles that the grandfather of today's Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany, Annalena Baerbock, was an ardent Nazi. So considering everything that's been going on between our two countries over the last few years, it turns out there's some genetic level that this virus of National Socialism is transferred in that country. Well, I think it's one of the, it's a kind of extreme nationalism. So it occurred to me just recently regarding those pogroms. They were mostly happening in the Russian Empire in the southwest, on the territory of today's Ukraine. So in 1905 in Kiev, if Mr. Blinken's forefather left in 1904, the first pogrom, the first mass pogrom in Kiev was in 1905. So his great-grandfather would only have found out about this from newspapers or from information that came from Kiev back then. Well, in fact, those mass events, they started occurring in early in 19th century, I think 1920 or 1921. And of course, it's a crime. They happened in Odessa, then in Melitopol, Zhytomyr, and in other cities and towns of today's Ukraine. A couple of them were in Belarus, a couple of them happened in Siberia, but the first one was related with the murder of the Greek patriarch Constantinople, when the Greeks who lived there considered that Jews had to do with this assassination attempt against the patriarch. That doesn't matter. What matters is that there were militia squads who countered those pogroms, and they consisted of youth, Jewish and Russian youth, and the Tsar government gave its evaluation of that event and tried to combat those tragic events, including resorting to army, among other things. But that's a separate topic. And as for nationalism, Nazism, and fascism, let me say something that may appear strange. Oh, Mrs. Annalena Baerbock, she represents the party, the Green Party, and many representatives of this spectrum of Europe's, this part of Europe's political spectrum, they instigate, they fuel people's fears in the face of events that can take place in the world due to climate change. And then they use those fears to pursue their political agenda, which is very far from their election promises. This is what is happening in Germany. Coal power generation has grown. It was higher than in Russia in the total energy balance, and now it's even bigger. So where is the green agenda now? Second, people like the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany, she has a hostile attitude towards Russia, but I think she's also the enemy of her own country, because it's difficult to imagine a politician of such stature, of such rank, to neglect so much the economic interests of her own country, her own nation. I won't go into details, but this is exactly what is happening. This is exactly what we're seeing now. And the second part of what I want to say may dissonate with what I have just said. I don't think that today's generation of Germans should bear the full political responsibility for everything that the Nazi Germany did. We cannot blame the people of today's generation for what Hitler and his associates were doing, not only in Germany, but in other parts of the world, Europe, and so on. I think that would be unfair. And, in fact, branding the entire German nation with this would be unfair. This would be abuse of what the people of the Soviet Union had to go through. I think this is not decent. But why? We should proceed from the realities of today. We should look at who is doing what right now and what policy they are pursuing. I think this is what would be good to do. I think in many countries, even those who are unlikely to use this as a political leitmotif, but are using it, unfortunately, I mean some exclusivity of some nations in the face of others, some chosenness, and so on. I think this is what Nazism started from. So if this is so popular now, we should think about building this anti-fascist and anti-Nazi propaganda on a global level. Let me repeat, on a global level. And it shouldn't be on a state level. It would only be efficient if it's done on the level of public conscience and public initiative. It doesn't matter in what country of the world it's going to happen. So in the European Union, there was almost panic in relation with the possible comeback of Donald Trump to the post of President of the US. In his recent statements, they baffled European leaders. He said that the US will only defend European countries in case European countries pay for that. Why do you think such an attitude has formed between European leading politicians, and Donald Trump? Trump was always known non-system politician. He has his own view of how the US should build relationships with their allies. Well, it wasn't easy before, I think. Look at the United States pulling out of the Kyoto agreements. It was tense then, but the then President of the United States decided that the US will pull out of those agreements because he thought that it harmed America's economy. He made the decision, and that's it. And however the European leaders would scold him, he did this. Later he corrected that. What is different about Trump's position in this case? Nothing is different. He just wanted the Europeans to pay more for defense, or as he said, let them pay America for defending them, for opening the nuclear umbrella over their heads. Well, let them sort this out. It's their problems. Well, I think he sees some logic in this. From the point of view of the Europeans, there is no logic to that. They would just like the United States to continue performing some functions free of charge, functions that shaped from the moment of NATO establishment. It's up to them. I think NATO makes no sense at all. There's only one point to that. It's an instrument of the US international policy. The current President of the United States, Biden, gives more and more reasons for the world to discuss the state of his health. That's the President of one of the biggest nuclear superpowers. And all of us have been seeing very peculiar footage almost every day. When you see and hear that, what do you think about? I think the domestic political campaign is gaining momentum in the United States, the electoral campaign. It's becoming, well, more and more intense. And I think it would be incorrect on our part to meddle in this process. Like, I met with Biden once in Switzerland. That was about 3 years ago, I think. And there were talks about him being not sane. Well, I didn't say anything like that. Well, he was speaking to his papers. I didn't notice any special. Well, he once bumped his head, once leaving a helicopter. But, well, all of us have bumped our heads here and there. Well, I'm not a doctor. I don't consider myself in the position to give any comments in this regard. This is not what we should be looking at. We should be looking at the political position. I think the position of today's administration is extremely harmful and erroneous. And this is what I told President Biden back then. Well, the question that was there 4 years ago, it's still relevant. Which one is better for us, Biden or Trump? Biden is the more experienced person, he's more foreseeable, predictable, he's an old-school politician. However, we're going to work with any American leader that the American people vote for. Going back to your interview to Tucker Carlson, we remembered the statements of current leaders of Germany and Great Britain. There was also a statement by Johnson, whom you mentioned in your interview to Tucker Carlson. It was he who, Arahami said, directed Kiev not to talk to Moscow, not to negotiate with Moscow, but to continue fighting. How do you think events will develop further? Well, Mr. Arahami said that himself. Just watch his interview. We didn't make him say that. He said what he was thinking, what was on his mind. Well, he's a frank person, obviously. He said that had they observed the agreements that took shape in Istanbul, war would have ended 1.5 years ago. He said that. During this interview of Mr. Carlson, I think we should play Mr. Arahami's interview along. Why did the West take this position? I'm saying the West, first of all, the Anglo-Saxon world, because former Prime Minister Mr. Johnson couldn't have come on his own without previously consulting Washington in this regard. And obviously, those consultations had not only taken place, I think he was just assigned by the American administration. I think they footed his traveling expenses. This is where he voiced the position, the opinion that Ukraine should fight Russia till the last Ukrainian and to deliver strategic defeat to Russia. This is what they probably were expecting. But as I told Mr. Carlson, I can say this to you, if they see that they cannot achieve the desired result, they probably should make some corrections. But this is, I think, a matter of politics. Because politics, as we know, is the art of compromise.